Hi, if you like the video, please remember to subscribe.
Hi everybody and welcome to SCL, the Subject, Composition and Light Photography Podcast. My name's Rob from robnellphoto.com and this is my little audio and video diary about my journey through the wonderful world of photography. I hope everybody's had a fantastic week. I've been a little bit busy this week, been working all week at work, funnily enough. Another 7-day shift, we've got plenty on. And after this week, sort of in a week's time, I've then got 2 weeks off, so it'd be great. Plenty of time to do more photography. I've been shooting with the little Minolta XA2, which I talked about last week, which is a great little viewfinder camera, the kind of development of the Olympus Trip 35. And it's been cool trying to sort of get used to using that sort of camera again, and just having something in my hand that's a little bit different to what we normally do. You have to forgive, it's the bells. Suzanne, my darling wife, has a bit of a thing for clocks. So as you can now guess, it's 8 o'clock on the evening of the 4th of March 2012, and I'm in Gosport in UK. On the south of the United Kingdom. So what we're going to talk about tonight? Well, the main thrust will be about shooting long exposures. I've talked a little bit about this before, but I had a question from Ian about it, so I thought I'd cover that. And then the second part will be a little bit about mobile phone, actually. I thought it might be good to share some of that, might be a little bit helpful to people out there who are thinking about getting a mobile phone or have already got one, or are in the situation like me where you're thinking about upgrading. But first off, it's a word from our sponsor, GoToMeeting. And GoToMeeting is a online computer-based and mobile phone-based and tablet-based conference system, but with anything to do with meetings between people. Obviously, being able to attach a face to a name is really important. It enhances our relationships and the way we do business. But unfortunately, meeting all your clients and colleagues in person can be impossible. That's why I recommend GoToMeeting with HD Faces. It lets you meet face to face from anywhere in the world. With GoToMeeting by Citrix, all it takes is a webcam and a click to collaborate in group, high definition video. You can see your attendees eye to eye while collaborating on documents in real time. You'll feel instantly connected even if you're thousands of miles apart. Plus, GoToMeeting is easy to set up and simple to use. For example, when we were discussing using GoToMeeting as a sponsor for the podcasts on the Tech Podcast Network, we all were given an opportunity to have a go at a conference call using GoToMeeting, using the webcams, and it really was very special indeed. It's great to be able to see the other people's desktops on their screen on your computer, but also to actually see them and talk to them at the same time. It made the meetings fun and obviously really productive as well, because people weren't off reading the newspaper or playing around with their phones. So you can start hosting your own face-to-face online meetings today with GoToMeeting, and you guys can all try it free for 30 days. Don't wait, take up this special offer now. Visit gotomeeting.com, click on the try it free button and use the promo code podcast. And make sure you use that promo code podcast. So visit gotomeeting.com, click on the try it free button and use the promo code podcast. Thanks to GoToMeeting for sponsoring the SCL Subject, Composition and Light Photography Podcast. So, got an interesting question from Ian who said, Rod, how do I take a photo with a long exposure time using the 350D? Excellent, he's got the same camera as me. I've recently found out about astrophotography, which entails long exposure times. I would be grateful if you could talk about it, Ian. Well, Ian, here we go. So, when we talk about long exposures in photography, it can mean lots and lots of different things. It could be landscapes with blurred clouds. It could be like a seascape or a river with that soft sort of cotton wool misty type effect. It could be photos taken at night with light trails from cars or star trails in the sky. Or it could be painting with light, where you actually go out and you do a long exposure and you shine torches and lights or pop flashes at different things to give them different colours. And there's lots of other things you can do with long exposure photography as well. But there's some kind of common features that you will use to make successful long exposures. Most obvious is you'll be using a tripod, or at least resting your camera on something solid. But my tripod, I'm using it for my video camera at the moment. Oh no, I haven't really talked about that, have I? Yeah, if you haven't checked it out already, SCL episode 180 is actually on YouTube. I did video it, you might have heard me muttering about it on last week's podcast. So if you fancy watching me, although I don't know why you would, as well as listening to my voice, you can nip on over to robnunphoto.com, find it's on the first page at the moment, or if you go to YouTube and just search for SCL 180, I'm sure you'll find it. So anyway, my tripod has got my old Fujifilm S5700 on it, which I'm using to record the podcast in the video version, but I'm still recording it on my laptop. So yeah, so for long exposure photography, you'll generally be taking advantage of using a tripod. If you're using an SLR, you'll be using something called mirror lockup, which is something, again, I've talked about before. But what happens is with an SLR, as the light comes in, it kind of comes through and it hits a mirror inside the camera and then bounces around and comes out the viewfinder. But the problem with that is that when you press the button, that mirror is kind of slapping around, and so that can make the camera shake. So what you'll find is, and this specifically for the 350D, if you go into the menu options and then go across to the custom functions, under custom function 7 you'll find the mirror lockup option, and then you can enable that. And what that means is when you trigger it, when you press your shutter release, you'll hear a click, and that just means the mirror's popped up out of the way, nothing else has happened. And then when you press it again, that's when it actually takes the photograph. So there's that delay. The other thing you'll probably use when you're doing long exposure photography is you'll be using some kind of remote to trigger the camera, so you're not actually touching it, so you're not bringing in shakes that way. With long exposure photography, the camera shaking a little bit at the beginning and the end doesn't really matter unless you're taking something with light trails in, because over the length of, say, a 25-second exposure or a 10-minute or a 10-hour exposure, a little bit of shaking at the beginning and the end doesn't matter. But if there's a light trail, if you imagine a light trail going across the photograph, if the camera shakes at all at the beginning or the end or any time, that light trail, instead of being smooth, will have little jaggy bits in, like that. So that's why often you use a remote, or if you haven't got a remote, if you look on the back of your camera, there'll be a setting where you can turn on the shutter delay, and that effectively does the same thing, because you press the button and the camera will then wait, say, 10 seconds before it actually takes the picture. Now what I'm going to do now is something very important. If you ever change the custom functions in your camera, make sure you change them back to what it should be, what you normally use. So that noise you can hear now, and you can see it on the videos, I've just put on the shutter delay, so the camera's going to wait 10 seconds and then it's going to actually take the photograph. So if you can imagine, the camera will have, any movement that I would have put into the camera by pressing the shutter button after 10 seconds hopefully will have disappeared. The other custom function you can put into your camera, and again on the 350D specifically, it's in the custom functions, is something called long exposure noise reduction, which is under option 2. And I tend to have that on all the time. And what that does, and it's available on, I think, on all SLRs, it'll be under some other menu. Check your user manual for specifics. With a digital camera, the longer that you're exposing for, the more noise is created into the photograph, because the electronic sensor that picks up the images gets warmer and warmer and warmer, so you get noise. Also, you may well have some hot pixels and things in your sensor. I won't talk about that, but basically, with low exposure noise reduction, what it does on the Canon is, you take a 10-second exposure. The camera exposes the picture for 10 seconds and then saves it. It then closes the shutter and then takes another photograph for 10 seconds with the shutter closed. And it compares the two photographs, and it says anything it sees on the second photograph must be noise and hot pixels, and kind of takes one away from the other, and means that your original photograph is a lot cleaner than it would be. And it works very well, and I would recommend you do that. In film, if you're taking long exposures, you have to think about something called reciprocity failure. And what that means is, if you use a film SLR or any film camera to take a picture for longer than a second, the film stops behaving in a linear fashion. So if you can imagine a graph with time along the bottom and then exposure along the top, for like a thousandth of a second to 1 second, if you double the exposure time, so if you go from a quarter of a second to half a second, the exposure will double as well. However, once you get beyond a second, it doesn't work like that, because the film doesn't respond the same way. So when you go from, like, say 2 seconds to 4 seconds, the exposure hasn't doubled. It might have gone up by 1.5 times. Now, all films will have a data sheet which explain this. So if you're doing very long exposures with film, say for 10 minutes, you work out that you want a 10-minute exposure. Actually, you might want a 15-minute exposure because of this effect of reciprocity failure. But it's a little bit too complicated for me to go into in this podcast. If you're shooting film and want to do long exposures, check it out on the internet. There's lots of stuff. The other thing you'll want to do as well is that with any type of SLR is, when you're taking a long exposure photograph, is cover the viewfinder. What you'll probably find, I haven't got it with me now, but you'll have some sort of, normally it's on your camera strap or in the box with your camera, there'll be a little cover. So say with a 350D, you can pop the little rubber eyepiece off, and there's a little cover that's on the strap that you can push on. I've got my R strap on here at the moment, so it's not on this particular one. Because what happens is, in a long exposure, not only do you get light coming in the front of the lens and then going in, but you can get light going in through the viewfinder as well and finding its way down onto the sensor, which can affect the exposure as well. So do that. Now, I don't do that much long exposure photography, but what I found is when I'm outside and doing it at night time, I tend to use aperture priority because it's simpler. The camera's still in an automatic mode. And it also enables me to control the depth of field, that is how much of the particular image is in focus. So they're like your common points then for your long exposures. Use a tripod, use mirror lockup, try and use your remote, use noise reduction, and see if you can cover the viewfinder. If it's not with the cover, just hold your finger near it, that's normally enough. But no, don't touch it because you make it wobble. So during the day, if you want to take long exposures, it can be really quite tricky. You can tighten up your aperture, so say go up to f16, f22, and that will reduce the amount of light coming into the camera. Again, we're shooting in aperture priority mode, and so the exposure will get longer, the shutter time. But the problem is, it probably won't be enough during the daytime. You still probably end up with like a quarter of a second exposure, which doesn't really bring any of the cool things in. The other problem as well is when you go down to like f22 with a digital SLR, all of a sudden you start seeing all these dust specks on your photographs, because digital sensors, even though they might look clean, can get quite dirty. So what you need to do then is block some of the intensity of light out from your lens, and most of us have probably already got a circular polarizing filter, and that will normally knock it down about a stop, or kind of almost double your exposure if you put one of them on. Specifically though, you want ND filters, neutral density filters, which block out the light and length of the exposure, and these come in different strengths like ND2, ND4, ND8. You get the variable ones, which are quite expensive, and you get things like the big stopper, which are about 10 stops, which basically turn day into night, so you can be by the seaside with crashing waves at 12 o'clock noon and be able to get that soft effect. But it's worth knowing that without something like that during the day, you can't do long exposures, because all your photographs will end up overexposed. Do that way. And well, if you do sort yourself out with an ND for doing long exposures during the day, how long you're actually going to do the exposure, different lengths create different effects. For example, if you do an exposure for anything more than 10 seconds, most moving objects will completely disappear. So somebody who's walking along, you won't see them in the photograph, unless they've got a light on them, like a car with a headlight on. So you can make busy cities appear really empty. Sometimes with shutter speeds between 1 and 5 seconds, they can be really interesting. What you tend to find is people who are walking can blur and almost completely disappear, but people who are stopped, or objects or things like cars that are stopped, will still appear sharp. So you get this really interesting combination of blurred things and sharp things. Most of my long exposure photography has been done at night, because that's the easiest time, because when you're shooting in aperture priority mode, you're going to get, well, any of the automatic modes, at night you're going to get a long exposure. And what I do is I use exposure compensation to knock it down about 2 stops, so the camera makes it nice and dark. And I don't need my NDs. And typically, if I'm, say, down at the harbour taking a picture of like Spinnaker Tower or the blocks of flats down there, they tend to be less than 30 seconds if I'm using, say, something like f8 or f16. So I don't have to be worried about going into manual mode and doing any experimentation, and then I can get nice light trails, blurs, smooth water, etc. But something worth mentioning is actually if you do go out and try and do long exposure photography at night, make sure you wrap up warm, have enough batteries, and generally just dress comfortably. Obviously be somewhere safe as well. And don't underestimate wobbles as well. I remember doing some long exposures on a motorway bridge, or a freeway bridge for our American and Canadian cousins. I was on the bridge and the motorway was coming underneath, and the traffic that was going underneath was actually making the whole bridge was wobbling. And when you look at, I'll see if I can put some of the pictures up in the show notes and on the video, you could actually see the trails of the lights from the cars kind of going along, and then there'd be a wobble when a truck went underneath the bridge, because it was making the bridge wobble. So don't underestimate that. And then you just experiment. Now, you can put your camera onto manual mode and just play around. Just put like in 10 seconds at f5.6 and see what comes out. Things like star trails I haven't really done, but from what I understand from reading up on the internet, you're really looking at 5 minutes plus to get a nice little trail. But if you want sort of big circles, like you see, you could be looking at 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours minimum. Remember that as the Earth is rotating and the stars appear to be moving across the sky, if you point your camera towards the north, that's when you'll get the circular type effects rather than just the lines. So maybe use the compass thing on your phone to guide you there. And also remember that when you are doing these long exposures of 20 minutes upwards, your battery life will come into severe question. You'll probably get lots of noise in your photograph, so bear in that mind, just use that noise reduction. And also any ambient light that's around, like so even street lights that are a long way away will probably show up. But again, it's all about experimentation. The final thing I'd sort of talk about with long exposures is light painting as well. So this is where you go out, you can do it outside, take your camera, set it up, point it at a subject, say a building that's got no lights on it, and then have like you could have flashes or a strobe speed lights, or you could have torches and shine them on things, and again do it in manual mode. But what I like to do with light painting is actually do it inside, with things like flowers and any sorts of objects. Set your camera up on the tripod. I tend to go to manual mode for this, and I just guess, so I'll put in like f8, so there's quite a big depth of field. Put the camera to manual focus on the thing, because if it's dark you can't, the camera won't autofocus. Have an idea what I want. I have a torch, turn off the lights, start the exposure, and just shine my torch all the way around the subject. And you get these really dynamic photographs that look like the objects have been lit from all sorts of directions, but they haven't. It's just been one light that you've moved around. And it's real fun and really cheap and easy to do, and you could do it like now. As long as it's dark, you can just have a go. And again, with long exposures, just have an experiment. Just experiment. If you've got a bridge or a compact, you might find you're limited to. I think the old Fuji S5700 was limited to 4 seconds was the longest exposure that it could do, but don't underestimate that. 4 seconds is quite a long time. If you can imagine you're standing by a fast road, how far a car would get in 4 seconds. So you get a nice big streak of a light trail, and with the painting with light you can do that easily as well. So you don't have to have like a DSLR to be able to do that. So light exposures, give them a go. And very thanks to Ian for the question, and if you've got any questions or comments, just email them to me, scalespeeder@gmail.com, and I'll try my best to answer them and help us all along. So the final little thing I wanted to talk about was my little HTC Desire Google Android phone, which I've actually had for 2 years now, and which means I'm up for, I can get an upgrade phone, and I'm deciding really what I want to do. I've recently reset the phone, deleted everything and started again, and kind of gone back to the core apps that I use all the time, and they would be things like obviously the camera, Gmail for checking my mail, the calendar app, Google Tasks I use a lot. I use the maps for free satellite navigation, which is really, really good. The internet browser, obviously. Google Docs a little bit. I tend to start documents off, for example the show notes for SCL, using Google Docs. The main problem I've had is typing still isn't brilliant on these little small phones. It's okay, but a keyboard is still much better. Dropbox I use a little bit, not that much. The flashlight app actually I use an awful lot. Funny that, isn't it? What else? Squarespace, which is the app for the Squarespace website. RubnandPhoto.com runs on Squarespace, so any comments I can moderate on there quickly. SpringPad's very good. SpringPad's like a massive kind of to-do list thing that you can do lots of things on. But probably the apps I use the most are Google Reader for reading my RSS feeds, going on to Vignette, which I use to edit my photographs, and what else do I use? Well, I've got Google Plus on here. I don't use Google Plus that much for like reading things, but what I do use it for is if you have Google Plus installed on your phone, what it will do is any photographs you take or videos you take, it will automatically copy them to your Google account, so you've got like unlimited automatic backup for all your phone and pictures and videos, which I think is really, really cool. Overall though, the HTC Desire, which is the same as the original Google, what was it called? It was the the Nexus 1. It is still a great phone. I mean, it's held up pretty well over the last 2 years. The only problem it really had, serious problem, was that the little cover that covers the camera lens was like this really soft plastic, and it got scratched and went kind of blurry fairly quick, so I had to pop it out with my finger. The camera isn't the best. It definitely has its strong points. It likes getting close into subjects. It doesn't like bright sunny days because it's subject to quite a lot of flare. You've got to kind of make sure that the sun's over there, not sort of over here, because you're in front of the camera, because you get a flare on it. Where I think it's really helped me though, photography wise, is through things like Google Reader, that enables me to consume photography. Wherever I am, I can be up to date with all my favourite Google photography blogs, and also I can go onto the internet, check out Flickr really fast. That's very, very good. But it's also, I'm quite conservative in my photo editing now. I tend to make things black and white, a little bit of colour. But because Vignette is such a great app for changing your photos, I've mucked around with things like cross-processing, bleach bypass, light leaks, and putting funky borders on my photographs as well, which I've never liked doing. I always thought, ugh. But because it's so easy to do it with Vignette, I've put them on, and I start thinking about including that sort of stuff in my photo editing process. And that's really a good thing. Anything that makes us think outside of the box and approach things with a different view will ultimately affect our other photography, well, our lives in general, and so that's very, very good. So now I'm kind of thinking, what do I do next? I've been looking. The problem I have now though is the contract I've got for my little phone with T-Mobile is actually quite good. It costs me, it's £15 a month, and I get unlimited internet, unlimited text, but I only get about 100 minutes. But all the other plans now, when you look at the plans, they're all a lot more expensive than that. and the internet charges can be quite high. So I'm not dead sure what I'm going to do. I think I'm probably going to have to phone up T-Mobile and say, look, what can you do for me? Because what the phone I'd really like is something like, I don't know, an iPhone 4 or 4S, or a Samsung Galaxy 2, or the Galaxy Nexus, or the bigger HTC phones as well. But ones which have got more memory, because the HTC Desire has only got 512 megabytes of internal memory, which limits you with some of the apps. And now the apps are getting bigger and bigger. You find that although you can copy lots of them to the SD card, some of the bigger ones start interfering with the phone, and the fact you start running out of memory. So there we go. So email your ideas. What phone should I look for next? Ideally, I want one with a better camera. Well, what I do want is one with a better camera than the HTC Desire. Otherwise, there isn't really any point to doing it. And I understand that the iPhone 4S is very, very good, but it's very expensive, so I'm not sure about that one. Right, so there we go. Remember that I should have thought about a fresh assignment for our Flickr group, but I haven't done it. It's just sort of come to me. So if you go to robnunphoto.com or the Flickr site, you'll notice that in the discussions forums there's a bit about new ideas. So we're going to be starting a March-April assignment pretty soon. So any ideas, chuck them in there. We'll put them in. Thanks to Everyday Jones, who do the intro and outro music on the audio podcast, and you can find their stuff for free download at everydayjones.com. But most of all, thanks to you for downloading the audio version of the podcast and watching the video version of the podcast on YouTube as well. My name's Rob from robnunphoto.com, and hopefully pretty soon I'll see you on Flickr.